Experience life in Caesarea in the time of Jesus, 24 hours in Rome's coastal port. What if everything you thought you knew about ancient life was wrong? What if the past wasn't dusty ruins and distant myths, but breathing streets where sweat mixed with salt air, where fortunes were made before breakfast, where the Roman Empire's machinery hummed with terrifying efficiency? What if you could walk those streets not as a tourist staring at broken columns, but as someone who belonged there, who understood the rhythm, who felt the weight of empire on your shoulders with every transaction, every glance, every careful word? What if one day in Caesarea Maritima could reveal more about power, survival, and human ambition than 100 history books? What if the stones themselves could whisper their secrets? You need to understand something fundamental before we begin. This isn't a story about heroes. There will be no dramatic rescue, no single protagonist rising against impossible odds. What you're about to experience is something far more unsettling, far more real. You're about to discover how an entire civilization organized itself around a single principle: control through infrastructure. By the time the sun sets on this particular day in the year 28 CE, you'll understand why Rome didn't just conquer, it reconstructed reality itself. You'll see how a harbor could be a weapon, how marble could be propaganda, how every architectural decision was a statement of dominance so complete that even 2,000 years later, you can still feel its weight. The darkness before dawn in Caesarea Maritima is not peaceful, it's tactical. You're standing on the eastern edge of the harbor, where the massive breakwater meets the shore, and even in this pre-dawn blackness, you can hear the empire breathing. The Mediterranean doesn't crash here, it negotiates, its waves broken and redirected by Herod's engineering marvel, a harbor that shouldn't exist. The water sounds different when it's been conquered. It moves against concrete and ashlar blocks that descend 40 feet below the surface, hydraulic concrete that hardens underwater, a Roman innovation that defies everything the ancient world understood about construction. The slapping sound is rhythmic, controlled, like the sea itself has been disciplined. The smell hits you before the light does. Salt, yes, but layered with fish oil, tar, hemp rope soaking in brine, human waste from the ships anchored in the outer harbor, and underneath it all, the mineral tang of fresh-cut stone. Somewhere in the darkness, stonemasons are already working, their hammers creating a percussion that echoes off the palace walls above. The temperature is 58 degrees, that peculiar Mediterranean cold that seeps through wool and linen, that makes your fingers clumsy and your breath visible. You pull your cloak tighter, but it doesn't help. The moisture in the air finds every gap. The first light doesn't arrive gently. It detonates. One moment the eastern horizon is black, the next it's split by a line of copper fire that turns the entire harbor into liquid bronze. The transformation is violent in its beauty. Suddenly you can see what the darkness was hiding. 30 vessels of varying sizes anchored in the semicircular embrace of the breakwater, their masts creating a forest of vertical lines against the emerging sky. The harbor itself is enormous, covering 40 acres of artificially calmed water, and as the light spreads, you begin to understand the audacity of what Herod built here. The breakwater stretches nearly 2,000 feet into the Mediterranean, a massive arm of stone and concrete that creates a safe anchorage where none existed before. On top of this arm, you can see the silhouettes of warehouses, their rooflines sharp against the brightening sky. This isn't just a harbor, it's a statement. It says, we can reshape nature. We can make the sea obey. We can build cities where cities shouldn't be. Every arriving merchant, every provincial governor, every tax collector and grain trader sees this harbor before they see anything else, and the message is unmistakable. Rome is inevitable. As dawn fully breaks, the city begins its orchestrated awakening. You're walking now, moving up from the harbor toward the lower city, and the transition is immediate. The dockside gives way to warehouses, massive stone structures with iron-reinforced doors that are already being opened by slaves whose names you'll never know. The sound of those doors, heavy oak, sliding on bronze hinges, creates a bass note that you feel in your chest. Inside, you catch glimpses of amphoras stacked to the ceiling, grain sacks forming geometric patterns, bales of Egyptian linen, Syrian glassware packed in straw, Phoenician purple dye in sealed containers that cost more than a laborer's annual wage. The streets are limestone, fitted so precisely that rainwater finds the channels without pooling. This precision isn't accidental. Every stone was measured, cut, placed with the understanding that infrastructure is power. A city that handles water efficiently handles everything efficiently. Roman engineering doesn't just solve problems, it demonstrates capacity. These streets are 3 times wider than necessary because Rome wants you to see the space, the abundance, the room for expansion. Even the negative space is propaganda. You pass a fountain, one of dozens that Herod installed throughout the city, fed by an aqueduct that brings fresh water from springs 9 miles away. The water is cold, mineral-rich, and endlessly available. People are already gathering with clay vessels, and you notice something crucial. The fountain is designed with multiple spouts at different heights. The highest for the wealthy, who don't have to bend. The middle for craftsmen and merchants, the lowest for slaves and the poor. Even access to water is stratified. Even thirst has a hierarchy. The fountain's marble facing shows scenes of Roman triumph, naval victories, conquered peoples bringing tribute. You can't take a drink without absorbing the message. This abundance comes from dominance. The residential quarter is waking in layers. The insulae, multi-story apartment buildings that house the working population, release their occupants like hives releasing workers. You see bakers heading to communal ovens, fishmongers moving toward the harbor with empty baskets, construction workers carrying tools toward the amphitheater that's still under expansion. Everyone moves with purpose because time in Caesarea is measured differently than in the villages. Here, time is money. Here, every delay costs someone something. The rhythm is urban, commercial, unforgiving. But it's the wealthy district that reveals Caesarea's true nature. As you climb toward the promontory where Herod's palace dominates the coastline, the architecture shifts dramatically. The insulae give way to private villas, single-story structures that spread horizontally, claiming space with aristocratic confidence. These homes have courtyards you can glimpse through open doorways, gardens with imported plants, mosaic floors depicting Greek myths and Roman victories. The walls are plastered and painted, colors that seem impossibly bright. Red ochre, Egyptian blue, yellow from arsenic compounds. These aren't homes. They're demonstrations of reach, showing that the owner can command resources from across the empire. The morning air carries sounds that tell you who's awake and working. From one villa, you hear the rhythmic scraping of a scribe's stylus on wax tablets. From another, the quiet murmur of a tutor instructing children in Greek grammar. From a third, the clinking of metal as a jeweler begins his day's work. Each sound represents a layer of civilization that Rome exports wherever it plants its standards. Education, commerce, administration, culture. These aren't natural developments. They're imported systems, transplanted wholesale, made to function in soil that never asked for them. Confira-se já inscrito neste canal, because what you're witnessing isn't just history, it's a blueprint for how power disguises itself as progress. And understanding this pattern will change how you see every city, every government, every system that claims to serve you while extracting from you. The harbor is fully awake now, and you need to see what happens here to understand how empire actually functions. You're standing on the main quay, a platform of fitted stone that runs for hundreds of feet along the inner harbor. The first ship of the morning is being unloaded, a grain vessel from Alexandria, and the process is a masterpiece of organized labor. 40 men are moving in synchronized patterns, a human machine that transfers wheat from ship to warehouse with minimal waste and maximum speed. The overseer doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. Every man knows his position, his timing, his quota. They're paid by the load, and efficiency means survival. The grain itself tells a story. It's Egyptian wheat, grown in the Nile Delta, taxed by Rome, shipped across the Mediterranean, distributed through Caesarea to feed Jerusalem and the Judean interior. This single ship carries enough grain to feed 5,000 people for a month, and 3 more ships are waiting in the outer harbor. This is how you control a province. You control the food. You make them dependent. You make sure every meal is a reminder that Rome provides. The wheat is more than nutrition. It's diplomacy. It's pacification. It's a promise and a threat combined. Next to the grain ship, a vessel from Tyre is unloading luxury goods. You can see silk from somewhere so far east it doesn't have a name you'd recognize. There are spices in quantities that seem absurd. Cinnamon, pepper, saffron, each worth more per pound than silver. There are ivory tusks from Africa, amber from the Baltic, gemstones from India. This cargo represents the entire known world concentrated in one hull, and all of it flows through Caesarea because Herod built a harbor that can accommodate deep-draft merchant vessels, because Rome built roads that can move goods inland, because there's a system of taxation, documentation, and security that makes trade possible at a scale that would have been unimaginable a century earlier. You watch a customs official inspect a shipment of Syrian glass. He's not looking for smuggling, he's calculating tax. Every item that crosses this quay generates revenue for Rome, and the bureaucracy that tracks it is more sophisticated than the engineering. There are ledgers, receipts, sealed documents, a paper trail that follows goods from origin to final sale. The customs house is a 2-story building adjacent to the harbor, and through its windows you can see scribes working in rows, their styluses moving across wax tablets with practiced precision. They're recording everything: quantity, origin, destination, tax paid, shipper's name, vessel designation. This data doesn't just collect taxes today, it predicts revenue tomorrow. It identifies patterns. It catches fraud. It's information warfare disguised as bookkeeping. The merchants themselves are a study in controlled anxiety. You see a trader from Damascus negotiating with a local grain broker, their conversation a careful dance of price, volume, delivery timing, and currency exchange. They're speaking Greek, the commercial language of the Eastern Mediterranean, but switching to Aramaic for sensitive details, then back to Greek for the formal agreement. 3 languages in 5 minutes, each serving a specific function. The merchant's fingers move across an abacus with unconscious skill, calculating margins that have to account for transport costs, spoilage rates, seasonal price fluctuations, and the constant possibility of piracy or storm loss. Every transaction is a gamble wrapped in mathematics. But here's what most people miss about Roman commerce. It's not just about moving goods, it's about moving information. Next to the customs house, you notice a smaller building with a different purpose. It's a courier station, part of the Cursus Publicus, Rome's postal system. Messages leave Caesarea daily for Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Rome itself. These aren't personal letters. They're intelligence reports, tax summaries, military dispatches, commercial contracts. A merchant in Caesarea can send instructions to a partner in Rome and receive confirmation within 6 weeks. This speed of communication creates a competitive advantage that's almost impossible to overcome. You can coordinate. You can adapt. You can exploit opportunities while your competitors are still hearing old news. The docks extend beyond the commercial quay into areas most visitors never see. There's a naval section where military vessels are maintained, triremes with their distinctive 3 levels of oars pulled up on slipways for hull inspection and repair. The smell here is different. Pitch and tar used to waterproof the hulls, mixed with the acrid tang of metal being worked in nearby forges. These ships aren't just defensive, they're projection platforms. They carry soldiers, supplies, intimidation. A single trireme can hold 200 Marines, and Caesarea keeps 6 of them operational at all times. That's 1,200 trained fighters who can be deployed anywhere along the coast within days. You notice something else about the naval section. Security is intense. Guards check credentials at multiple points. The ships themselves are surrounded by barriers. Access is controlled, documented, restricted. This isn't paranoia, it's operational security. These vessels represent strategic assets, and Rome doesn't leave strategic assets vulnerable. The same principle applies to the harbor's construction details, the aqueduct's source locations, the palace's defensive features. Critical information is compartmentalized, shared only on a need-to-know basis, protected by systems within systems. The morning progresses and you're drawn toward the amphitheater. It's located at the city's southern edge, positioned so the Mediterranean provides a dramatic backdrop. Even unfinished, it's massive, seating for 15,000 spectators arranged in precise semicircular tiers. The architecture is quintessentially Roman, following the same principles you'd find in theaters across the empire. This standardization isn't accidental. When a merchant from Gaul visits Caesarea, he sees familiar forms. When a soldier from Syria transfers here, he recognizes the urban layout. Rome creates consistency because consistency creates comfort, and comfort creates compliance. You climb to the upper tiers, and from this height, the city reveals its complete design. Caesarea isn't organic. It wasn't shaped by centuries of gradual growth. It was planned, executed, imposed. The street grid is orthogonal, running north-south and east-west with geometric precision. The major thoroughfares are colonnaded, creating covered walkways that provide shade and shelter. Every public building, temple, bath, and marketplace is positioned according to a master plan that prioritizes visibility, access, and symbolic hierarchy. The temple to Roma and Augustus occupies the highest ground. The palace commands the waterfront. The amphitheater dominates the southern approach. Every sightline is curated. From here, you can also see what surrounds Caesarea. Agricultural land stretching inland, carefully irrigated, producing grain, olives, wine grapes. These aren't subsistence farms. They're commercial operations, export-oriented, integrated into the broader Mediterranean economy. The peasants working those fields aren't independent farmers. They're tenants on estates owned by absentee landlords, paying rent in kind, locked into a system that extracts surplus with mechanical efficiency. The city feeds on the countryside, and the countryside has no choice but to feed the city. The construction site at the amphitheater reveals Roman building techniques in action. You see stonemasons shaping blocks with iron chisels, their movements economical, practiced. Each stone is being cut to specifications determined by the architect, who works from drawings that show every dimension, every angle, every connection point. There's no improvisation. The entire structure exists as a complete mental model before the first stone is laid. This planning capacity is what separates Roman engineering from everything that came before. They don't build and adjust, they calculate and execute. The workers themselves represent the empire's labor model. Some are free craftsmen, paid by the day, specialists in stonework or carpentry or metalwork. Others are slaves, property of the construction contractor, their labor costed as a capital expense rather than an operating cost. Still others are soldiers from the garrison, assigned to construction duty as part of their service obligation. This mixed labor force allows Rome to build at scales that pure wage labor couldn't support, while maintaining quality through the craftsmen and discipline through the military presence. Write down this sentence in the comments. I never imagined ancient cities were this calculated. Because if you're feeling uncomfortable right now, if there's something unsettling about seeing civilization as a machine designed for extraction and control, then you're beginning to understand what most people miss about history. The marketplace comes alive as the sun reaches its zenith, and you're swept into its currents whether you want to be or not. The density is overwhelming. Hundreds of people compressed into a space designed for thousands, everyone moving with purpose, everyone knowing the unwritten rules that make this organized chaos function. You pass a bread stall where the vendor is selling 4 grades of product, each aimed at a different economic tier. The cheapest bread is coarse, dark, filling but not pleasant. The most expensive is white, soft, made from imported wheat. The message is clear. You are what you can afford. Next to the bread stall, a butcher is displaying meat that's been inspected and approved by city officials. The inspection mark is stamped in red dye on each piece, a guarantee of quality that also serves as a tracking mechanism. If someone gets ill from bad meat, officials can trace it back to this specific vendor, this specific day. The butcher knows this, which makes him careful. The system creates accountability through documentation, and accountability creates compliance. You don't need heavy enforcement when everyone knows they're being tracked. The fish section is separated from other food vendors because of the smell, but also because fish spoils quickly and requires rapid turnover. The vendors here are working against the clock, calling out prices that drop as the day progresses. Fresh fish in the morning commands a premium. By afternoon, it's discounted. By evening, what hasn't sold gets salted or made into garum. Nothing is wasted because waste is unprofitable, and unprofitability means elimination. The market is Darwinian in its efficiency. You notice a woman buying vegetables, and the transaction reveals layers of economic reality. She's haggling, but within understood parameters. The vendor expects negotiation. The customer expects some reduction. They meet at a price that both can justify. But there's another element. The vendor is giving her slightly better produce than he gives other customers. Why? Because she's a regular. Because her husband works at the palace. Because relationships matter in a face-to-face economy. Because today's small favor might be tomorrow's big advantage. Commerce isn't just about price. It's about networks, reputation, reciprocity, trust. The textile merchants occupy a privileged section of the market, protected from sun and rain by permanent awnings. Their goods are expensive enough to justify the protection. Wool from Syria, linen from Egypt, silk from beyond the eastern frontier. You watch a merchant display a length of purple-dyed fabric to a wealthy customer. The purple is vivid, expensive, restricted by law to certain social classes. Owning it without permission is technically illegal. The merchant knows exactly who can buy this, who's entitled to wear it, who will be inspected and questioned. The fabric is beautiful. It's also a marker of status that the state regulates. Adjacent to the textiles, a spice merchant has created a sensory assault. Cinnamon, cloves, pepper, cumin, coriander, saffron, each in its own container, each releasing a distinct aroma that competes and combines with the others. The merchant is offering samples, letting potential customers taste before buying. This seems generous until you understand the economics. Spices are so expensive that customers need convincing. A pinch given free now might generate a sale worth a week's wages. The merchant isn't being generous, he's investing. You pass a section where agricultural tools are sold: plows, hoes, sickles, all made from iron that's been imported from specialized forges in other regions. The tools look simple, but they represent complex supply chains. Iron ore mined in one province, smelted in another, forged in a third, transported along Roman roads to markets throughout the empire. A peasant buying a plow handle doesn't think about this network. He just knows the tool is available, reliable, standardized. The complexity is hidden. The convenience is visible. That's how systems maintain themselves. The pottery vendors display an astonishing variety. Cooking pots, storage jars, oil lamps, decorative pieces, roof tiles, drainage pipes. Every ceramic need is represented, every price point covered. But what's remarkable isn't the variety, it's the standardization. Storage jars come in predictable sizes because shipping and taxation require predictable measurements. Roof tiles have consistent dimensions because buildings are constructed to standard plans. Even creativity is channeled through standardized forms. It makes commerce efficient. It also makes surveillance easier. You're watching a transaction between a pottery vendor and a restaurant owner, and the negotiation reveals how commercial credit works in this economy. The buyer doesn't have enough cash today to pay the full amount. The vendor agrees to partial payment now, with the remainder due in 30 days. No interest is charged, but the vendor notes the debt in a ledger that both parties acknowledge. If the buyer fails to pay, the vendor has recourse through the city's commercial courts. The system runs on trust backed by enforcement. Credit extends commerce beyond immediate cash availability, but it also creates dependencies, obligations, power relationships that money alone doesn't capture. If you found this level of economic sophistication surprising, show your appreciation by liking this video, because we're only halfway through this day, and what you're about to see in the afternoon will reveal how Rome maintained control not just through commerce, but through cultural programming so subtle that people adopted it voluntarily. The public baths open precisely at noon, and you need to see them because they reveal something crucial about Roman social engineering. The complex occupies an entire city block, supplied by the same aqueduct that feeds the fountains. The entrance fee is nominal, deliberately kept low so that even laborers can afford it. This accessibility isn't generosity, it's strategy. The baths serve multiple functions simultaneously: hygiene, recreation, social networking, political discussion, business dealing, and most importantly, cultural assimilation. When you bathe Roman style, you adopt Roman habits. When you adopt Roman habits, you start thinking like a Roman. The entrance sequence is designed to transition you from the outside world into a controlled environment. You pass through a vestibule where you remove your street clothes and receive a numbered token for retrieval. The act of undressing is equalizing. Rich and poor, citizen and freedman, all enter the bath area in the same state. Social markers are temporarily suspended, creating an illusion of equality that makes the actual hierarchy more acceptable when you return to it. The frigidarium, the cold bath, is fed by spring water channeled through lead pipes. The temperature is maintained at 55 degrees through a combination of depth and flow rate, engineering that keeps the water constant regardless of season. You watch men enter, immerse, emerge gasping. The cold is a shock that drives blood to the core, a physiological reset, but it's also a social filter. Only the disciplined, the committed, the properly Roman endure the cold bath without complaint. It separates the civilized from those who haven't fully internalized Roman values. The tepidarium is warm, heated by hypocaust, that brilliant Roman invention where hot air from furnaces circulates under the floor through a network of brick pillars. The floor itself is mosaic, geometric patterns in white, black, and red stone. You can feel the heat through your sandals, a constant warmth that rises through your body. People linger here, talking, conducting business, making connections. You overhear a construction contractor negotiating with a pottery supplier, their conversation casual but precise. By the time they leave, they've agreed on delivery schedules, pricing, and payment terms without ever acknowledging they were conducting business. The caldarium, the hot bath, is almost unbearable. Steam fills the room, creating a fog that reduces visibility to arm's length. The heat is produced by the same hypocaust system, but intensified. You can only stay for minutes before your heart rate becomes uncomfortable. But in those minutes, you sweat out everything. Salt, toxins, stress. The Romans believe sweat is purifying, that it removes corruption from the body and mind. They're not entirely wrong. The heat forces cardiovascular adaptation, increases circulation, promotes healing. But more than that, it creates a shared ordeal. Everyone in the caldarium is equally vulnerable, equally exposed. Social barriers dissolve in the steam. Adjacent to the bathing areas are exercise rooms where men practice with weights, wrestle, box with leather-wrapped hands. The exercise isn't just physical conditioning, it's cultural performance. Romans value physical fitness as a marker of discipline, self-control, martial readiness. A soft body implies a soft mind, and a soft mind makes you vulnerable in a world that rewards hardness. The exercise rooms are where young men prove themselves, where older men maintain their edge, where everyone demonstrates their commitment to Roman values through visible effort. Beyond the exercise rooms, you find a library, a quiet space where scrolls are available for reading. The selection is carefully curated. Roman history, Greek philosophy, technical manuals on agriculture and engineering, poetry that celebrates empire and conquest. There are no subversive texts here, no philosophical critiques of power, no alternative visions of social organization. The library offers knowledge, but channeled knowledge, filtered through an ideological lens that makes certain questions unthinkable. You can learn almost anything here, except how to challenge the system that provides the learning. The massage rooms employ specialists who know anatomy, pressure points, muscle groups. They work with olive oil infused with herbs, their hands finding tensions and releasing them with practiced skill. The massage is therapeutic, but it's also another form of cultural programming. You're learning that your body deserves care, that pleasure is acceptable, that Rome provides services that enhance quality of life. These aren't frivolous luxuries. They're demonstrations that the system works, that compliance brings benefits, that resistance means giving up comforts you've come to depend on. Share this experience with someone who needs to understand that power doesn't just control through force, it controls through seduction, through making the system so comfortable that alternatives become unimaginable, because that's the kind of dominance that lasts for centuries. The afternoon light has a different quality now, harder, more revealing. You leave the baths and move toward Herod's palace, the structure that dominates the promontory and serves as the administrative center of Roman authority in Caesarea. Even from a distance, you can sense its purpose. This isn't just a residence. It's a fortress disguised as luxury, a control center wrapped in marble and myth. The approach is calculated to humble. The road narrows as you near the palace gates, forcing visitors into single file. The walls rise higher with each step, blocking the sky, creating a sense of enclosure that becomes oppressive. By the time you reach the actual entrance, you're already psychologically diminished. The gate itself is flanked by guards, not ceremonial ornaments, but functioning soldiers with actual weapons, actual authority to deny access. They check credentials with bored efficiency. This is routine for them. For you, it's a reminder that entry is privilege, not right. The entrance passage is deliberately disorienting. It turns at right angles, eliminating sight lines, creating moments where you can't see what's ahead or behind. The ceiling is low, making tall men duck. The lighting is minimal, just enough to navigate, not enough to see clearly. By the time you emerge into the palace's first courtyard, you've been separated from the outside world through a sequence of controlled transitions that reset your psychological baseline. The courtyard is a shock. It's vast, paved with marble imported from Greece, surrounded by colonnaded walkways that create geometric precision. In the center, a fountain displays water with wasteful abundance, the flow rate deliberately excessive to demonstrate that resources aren't a concern. The water's sound fills the space, creating an acoustic environment that makes conversation difficult except in designated areas. This isn't accidental. The fountain controls where and how people can communicate, channeling interactions into observable zones. The columns surrounding the courtyard are Corinthian, elaborately decorated, their capitals carved with acanthus leaves so detailed you can see individual veins. This level of craftsmanship isn't necessary for structural integrity. It's pure statement. We have enough wealth to waste it on beauty. We have enough skilled labor to spend months carving stone that supports nothing but status. We are so far beyond survival that we can afford impractical excellence. The message isn't subtle. It's not meant to be. You're led into the audience hall, and the scale is overwhelming. The ceiling is 40 feet high, supported by columns that seem too slender for the load they carry, creating an impression of gravity defied through superior engineering. The floor is mosaic, depicting Neptune commanding the seas, surrounded by sea creatures rendered with such skill you can identify individual species. The walls are frescoed with scenes of Roman military victories, not recent battles but timeless classics, showing that Rome's dominance is eternal, not circumstantial. Every element coordinates to create one overwhelming impression: power made visible through material display. But the most revealing feature is something most visitors miss. Along the walls, at regular intervals, are small ventilation shafts that seem purely architectural. They're not. They're acoustic channels that carry sound from the audience hall to chambers above and below, allowing guards and scribes to hear everything said here without being present. Every negotiation, every petition, every conversation is monitored. Privacy doesn't exist in Herod's palace. The assumption of surveillance modifies behavior without anyone acknowledging it's happening. People self-censor. They moderate their language. They say what they think power wants to hear. The surveillance doesn't need to be visible to be effective. You're shown into the administrative wing, where the actual work of governance happens. This is where theory becomes practice, where imperial directives translate into local action. The rooms are smaller here, more functional, organized around efficiency rather than display. Scribes work at long tables, copying documents, recording transactions, maintaining the bureaucratic machinery that makes Roman rule possible. These men aren't soldiers or aristocrats. They're professionals, trained in accounting, legal procedures, administrative protocols. They know more about how the province actually functions than any governor ever will. The tax records occupy an entire room, scrolls organized by district, by type of revenue, by fiscal year. You can see at a glance what each region contributed, who paid and who defaulted, where revenues exceeded projections and where they fell short. This information isn't just historical record, it's predictive modeling. It identifies trends, it spots anomalies. It allows administrators to allocate resources, adjust policies, project future revenues with surprising accuracy. The empire runs on information, and information requires systematic collection, standardized formatting, centralized storage, and professional interpretation. Adjacent to the record room, you find the treasury, where actual currency is stored. The security is layered: iron doors, armed guards, counting procedures that require multiple witnesses. The coins themselves are standardized, minted with imperial imagery, guaranteed for weight and purity. This standardization enables commerce across vast distances. A merchant in Britain knows a denarius from Rome has the same value as a denarius from Alexandria because the system guarantees it. Currency isn't just money. It's trust made tangible, backed by the state's capacity to enforce standards and punish counterfeiters. The palace's upper level houses private quarters for the governor and his family, but also for visiting dignitaries, military commanders, commercial delegations. These rooms are surprisingly modest in scale, though exquisite in detail. The walls are painted with pastoral scenes that offer visual escape from the urban intensity below. The furniture is Greek-influenced, emphasizing proportion and craftsmanship over ostentation. Even the bedding is practical. Wool-filled mattresses on simple frames, designed for function rather than display. The private sphere values restraint, creating contrast with the public area's calculated excess. From the palace's highest terrace, you have an unobstructed view of the entire city and the sea beyond. This position isn't decorative, it's strategic. From here, you can see incoming ships while they're still miles offshore. You can observe the harbor's operations without being observed. You can monitor the city's major thoroughfares, identify unusual movements, spot potential problems before they develop. The palace isn't just a residence or administrative center. It's an observation post that provides information advantage to whoever controls it. The afternoon is waning, and you're drawn back toward the city's commercial heart. The market is transitioning from wholesale to retail, from professional merchants to household buyers. The energy is different now, less intense but more diverse. You see families shopping together, children sent on errands, elderly residents who've lived here since Herod first broke ground. These people aren't tourists in their own city. They're participants in a system that predates most of them and will likely survive all of them. You stop at a wine shop, watching the proprietor serve customers with practiced efficiency. He's offering tastings, explaining origins, suggesting pairings with different foods. But he's also observing, noting who buys what, who can afford imported vintages versus local production, who's spending beyond their apparent means. This information has value. It might reveal a merchant who's doing better than he admits, the official receiving bribes, a family hiding assets. The wine seller isn't just selling wine. He's gathering intelligence that might be traded, sold, or leveraged when opportunity arises. The streets are filling with workers heading home from various jobs, construction sites, warehouses, workshops, administrative offices. The flow is directional now toward the residential districts, creating human rivers that follow the most efficient routes. You're carried along, part of a collective movement that requires no coordination because everyone knows where they're going. This is what urban living creates: shared rhythms, predictable patterns, collective behaviors that emerge from individual decisions but create system-level effects. As the sun begins its descent, the city transforms again. Vendors who work the day shift close their stalls, replaced by evening traders offering different goods: prepared food, oil for lamps, firewood, wine by the cup. The market adapts to changing needs, demonstrating flexibility within a rigid structure. The infrastructure remains constant: the stalls, the street layout, the regulations. What changes is the content, the specific transactions, the immediate offerings. The system is permanent. The participants are temporary. You're watching the sunset from the amphitheater's upper tier, and from this elevation, the city's complete design becomes visible. The grid pattern that seemed arbitrary at street level reveals its logic from above, optimized for traffic flow, military movement, emergency response. The major intersections are all visible from either the palace or the garrison. The major public buildings create a network of observation points. The whole city is designed to be legible to authority while remaining complex enough to accommodate commerce. The sun touches the Mediterranean, and the light show begins. The limestone and marble buildings catch the western rays, glowing orange, then red, then purple. The palace, positioned to maximize this effect, becomes almost luminescent. The temple's white columns turn golden. The amphitheater's curves create shadow patterns that emphasize its geometric perfection. This isn't accidental beauty, it's designed spectacle, timed to coincide with the end of the workday when maximum population can witness it. The city performs every evening, demonstrating that Roman engineering creates not just function, but transcendence. As darkness approaches, torches are lit along major streets, creating corridors of light that make navigation possible and demonstrate state capacity to control even darkness. The wealthy light oil lamps in their homes, creating warm glows that spill through windows. The insulae remain mostly dark, conserving fuel, but the sounds emerging from those buildings reveal that life continues. Conversations, arguments, laughter, crying children, the acoustic texture of urban density compressed into insufficient space. You're standing again at the harbor, watching the last light fade over the Mediterranean. The water has turned black, indistinguishable from the sky except for reflected torchlight, creating scattered points of fire on the surface. The ships anchored in the harbor are dark shapes, their presence indicated by sounds. Rope creaking, wood shifting, water lapping against hulls. A night watch is being established, guards taking positions, vigilance maintained even when most people sleep. The evening meal in Caesarea happens at different times for different classes, but the principle is universal. Eating together creates social bonds that reinforce existing structures. In the wealthy villas, slaves serve multiple courses using imported tableware. The conversation ranges across politics, commerce, philosophy, gossip. Alliances form, information exchanges, deals get structured. The meal is a forum where power negotiates with itself. In the middle-class homes, families eat simpler fare but with similar social purpose. Parents teach children table manners, which are really lessons in social hierarchy and self-control. Siblings compete for attention and resources in miniature versions of the adult competitions they'll soon join. Husbands and wives discuss household management, which includes financial planning, servant supervision, social obligations, and strategic networking. Even domestic meals have political dimensions. In the insulae, eating is more functional, simple food, minimal preparation, quick consumption. But even here, there's social structure. Families maintain eating rituals that create predictability and comfort. Neighbors share resources when someone's short. Children learn to navigate scarcity without complaint. Poverty creates its own forms of organization, its own hierarchies, its own codes that outsiders don't understand. The night market opens as the day market closes, serving a different clientele with different needs. There are food stalls offering hot meals to people who work evening shifts or can't cook at home. There are pleasure establishments that cater to various appetites, all carefully regulated by city authorities who tax them while pretending they don't exist. There are gambling houses where men risk wages they can't afford to lose, creating a permanent underclass of debtors who feed the system's need for desperate labor. You pass a night school where slaves and freedmen are learning to read and write, skills that might eventually buy freedom or at least better positions. The teacher is a Greek freedman who charges minimal fees because he believes in education's transformative power. He's not wrong, but he's also not seeing the complete picture. Literacy creates opportunities. It also creates dependencies. Once you can read, you need texts. Once you need texts, you need suppliers. Once you need suppliers, you're integrated into commercial networks that reinforce the system. Even liberation creates new forms of connection. The garrison never sleeps. You walk past the military compound and hear the sounds of changing watch, soldiers reporting for night duty, others standing down after day shifts. The rhythm is precise, measured in 4-hour watches that divide night into manageable segments. Each watch has specific responsibilities: gate security, wall patrol, harbor observation, palace guard, rapid response readiness. The military creates order through routine so rigid it becomes invisible to those who depend on it. In the harbor, night fishing boats are departing, their torches creating moving lights on the dark water. They'll work until dawn, returning with catches that feed the city's morning appetite. The boats are small, crewed by family groups who've fished these waters for generations. They know the currents, the depths, the seasonal movements of fish populations. This knowledge is valuable, but it doesn't translate into economic power because they don't control distribution. The fish they catch get sold through markets controlled by others, taxed by authorities, transported by merchants. The fishermen have expertise, the system has control. Confira se já é inscrito neste canal, because understanding how power actually operates, how it hides in plain sight, how it makes itself feel inevitable, that's knowledge that changes everything. If you've watched until here, it's because you understand that real history isn't about memorizing dates. It's about recognizing patterns. Se você assistiu até aqui é porque gostou desse caso, deixe um comentário dizendo "Eu assisti até aqui", para que eu possa te conhecer e saber quem realmente gosta das histórias aqui do canal. Show your support by liking this video, because creating content this detailed, this researched, this honest about how civilization functions requires massive effort and commitment to not simplifying uncomfortable truths. Share this with someone who still thinks ancient history is irrelevant, someone who needs to see that the past isn't past, it's prologue, and we're still living in structures built on principles first perfected 2,000 years ago on the coast of Judea.